invite you 1 second. And then I'll bring in everyone in now. Take it away, Jamie.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you all for joining today's Federal Assistance E3011 session. As we settle in and people are connecting their audio and getting admitted into the session, we'd really love for everyone to share their name, their title, and the city that they're from. It really helps us, especially when we get to the Q&A portion, and we're going to try to make this a really interactive session. We're at a critical moment. It is November 12th, 2024. And we have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate our state and local fiscal recovery funds. And we are pledged, the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Bloomberg Philanthropies, to helping you make sure that you obligate each and every dollar appropriately and correctly, and that you report your obligations accurately to the U.S. Treasury Department, because we don't want to see one single dollar that we know can benefit your local communities being sent back. And so we're so grateful to the U.S. Department of Treasury for joining us today and for helping us both understand what are we seeing in the data that's coming out about cities' obligations and how they're obligating it. What are some of those so common errors that cities might be encountering, and how do we counteract those? And what should you all know as we approach this really pivotal deadline? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Vera Soto, who manages the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund program at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate that. To everyone joining us today, welcome, and thank you for joining the session. We are at a crucial time, as was noted, and so I want to extend our thanks to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Bloomberg Philanthropies for bringing us all together. My name is Veronica Soto. I go by Vero, and I serve as the director of the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds program. I'm going to turn the presentation in a short moment to my colleague, Mira Patel, who helps lead our outreach efforts. But first, let's go through what we're going to cover from Treasury's perspective on today's conversation. So we're going to start with an overview of the SLFRF program and that obligation deadline of December 31, 2024. That date is something we can't stress enough. We will share some highlights from our recent reporting data and have a small demonstration of how you can explore this data yourself. What we're also going to do is show you a way in which you can check what we at Treasury see to show us that you have obligated. As Jamie mentioned, it's very important that we don't have errors in the data being reported, because that data is how we can gauge how you are doing as a recipient of these funds and how you are doing in meeting that obligation deadline. So I'm excited that we'll get to share that. We'll provide a brief overview of recent guidance on obligation updates, and we'll touch on revenue loss and interagency agreements, among many of the frequently asked questions that we get. And I do have to have a small disclaimer here. So we're very happy to join this presentation with our wonderful partners, and the statements of the participating entities in this presentation are their own and were not made on behalf of the Department of Treasury. So this is intended solely to assist recipients of SLFRF funds and should not be viewed as an endorsement by Treasury of the participating entities or their statements. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mira. Mira?
Thank you so much, Vero. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. The SLFRF program was authorized under the American Rescue Plan Act and has provided $350 billion directly to communities like you all to respond to the pandemic and to build strong, resilient, and equitable recovery through states, territories, local governments, and tribal programming to each address their own needs. $45.6 billion was allocated directly to metropolitan cities and nearly $20 billion to smaller local governments. I'd now like to turn on the next slide to some recently released public data, which demonstrates how recipients have been putting the power of their SLFRF dollars to work to forward this change in their community. So in this latest quarterly data, which represents what recipients you all have reported to us through June 30th, recipients continue to report great progress on executing their planned uses. We've seen that states and the largest cities and counties, those quarterly reporters, have reported budgeting 95% of their total SLFRF funds to specific projects. And we've seen recipients report $353 billion in lost revenue resulting from the pandemic. So a significant percentage of this revenue shortfall is being made up for by SLFRF funds. In this latest data, we've seen 22,000 participating governments report budgeting nearly $136 billion to help replace this lost revenue, funding more than 83,000 projects to provide fiscal stability in their jurisdiction. On the next slide, we have some quick highlights that we thought may be of interest, particularly thematically. Most notably, I want to call out recipients' investment in workforce, where we've seen over $13 billion allocated towards 3,100 workforce projects, benefiting almost 1.4 million workers across the country. $19.3 billion towards 3,100 affordable housing projects, and over $34 billion towards 13,000 infrastructure projects across the country. This quarter's impressive data emphasizes the critical investment areas that you all are undertaking in your communities. And we really encourage you to look at the data dashboard on our website. So with that, I'm going to do a quick demonstration here to show you all how you can get to this information. And this is available on our main public page, SLFRF, local fiscal recovery funds right here. And if you scroll down, you get to public data. This is a page that captures all of the data that we collect from recipients. You'll see here the April quarterly reporting. This includes annual reporters, so some of our smallest recipients. This data here, the July data, some of the data I was just referring to. We have analysis here, some thematic areas. But if you want to explore the data yourself, you click this dashboard. And so we'll click through here. Thank you for your patience. It's a very big spreadsheet as well. But here you'll see the sort of full overview. If you're interested in specific recipients, whether they're yourselves or peers that you may be curious how they're thinking through funding, you can go here. You can also look at specific projects. So everything in here is organized both by recipient type, so the sort of recipient that you are. Then we have a recipient expenditure category group. So public health, infrastructure, revenue replacement, natural disasters, etc. So you can click any one of these tabs to see how communities are allocating their funds towards specific thematic areas, depending on your area of interest. You can also search by recipient type. So you could see local governments, you could see sort of recipients by size, and then you also can directly search for any community in the country that's been a recipient of our program. With that, I'm going to do one more quick presentation to show you one area that we've seen come up a bit in reporting. So hopefully, can everyone see that? Excellent. So this really represents a recipient that we've anonymized. This is a project that was reported to Treasury through their expenditure report. And I want to focus on something that here does not, that does not successfully report the obligation of funds to Treasury. So this is a common reporting error that we've seen in the obligation of funds, and it's in the revenue loss eligible use category. So we wanted to spend some time making sure governments on this call really understand how to successfully report revenue loss projects. So on the next slide, we're going to click through. This is all available online in the public data portal that I went to. You'll see here, you can search by project, you can search by place. And you'll see here that they've dedicated funds to infrastructure. In particular, this recipient has identified a project that intends to use the $10 million of funds under the revenue loss eligible use category for a clean water project. However, as we look this slide over, I want to call your attention to a particular challenge here. While the recipient has elected the standard allowance under the revenue loss eligible use category, the recipient has not reported obligating any funds to Treasury. To use funds under the revenue loss eligible use category, recipients must obligate those funds and report obligations to Treasury through this two-step process. We'll drop a link in the chat that has more details for an explainer video to talk through this in detail. And then I'll just quickly walk us through that now. So here you'll see the first step in the process, which is that the recipient must report revenue loss that they are claiming, including whether claiming up to $10 million in revenue loss under the standard allowance or calculating revenue loss according to the formula provided in the 2022 final rule. So this recipient has successfully claimed the standard allowance. They put information about how they plan to use the funds in the explanation field. However, as you see, this is not sufficient information to report an obligation for those funds. The second step the recipient must complete is reporting projects under the expenditure category 6. These projects must include the amount of SLFRF funds budgeted, if applicable, obligated, and expended under the revenue loss eligible use category. These projects must also include a project description. Revenue loss project descriptions must summarize the project in sufficient detail to provide an understanding of the major activities that will occur. As you can see, because this recipient did not report any projects under the expenditure category 6 or any other expenditure category, none of the recipient's SLFRF funds are reported as obligated. I want to emphasize that electing the standard allowance or calculating revenue loss are not sufficient to obligate funds under the revenue loss category. SLFRF recipients electing the standard allowance must obligate these funds for projects and report these projects under the expenditure category 6. These projects must include the amount obligated for those projects. So here's another example of an error Treasury has observed related to the revenue loss eligible use category. As you'll see here, to benefit from the streamlined eligibility and reporting requirements for the revenue loss category, the project must be reported under revenue loss EC6 if the recipient is using SLFRF funds under the revenue loss use category. So this is a project that was actually reported under one of the water and sewer eligible use subcategories. If a project is an eligible use under one of the water and sewer eligible use sub-use categories, a recipient may choose to report the project under EC5. However, if the recipient does so, Treasury will not consider the project to be under the revenue loss eligible use category. Accordingly, the project will be subject to more detailed reporting requirements, a larger number of provisions of the uniform guidance, and other requirements associated with the water and sewer eligible use category. Alternatively, if a recipient would like a project to be treated as a revenue loss project, it must be reported under EC6. Finally, please remember that governments must obligate all funds for any eligible use category before the obligation deadline. This includes funds used under the revenue loss eligible use category, and you can see FAQ 17.5 for more information, and my colleague Jackie will drop a link to our FAQs in the chat where you can find more information. And with that, I'd love to return back to the main deck, please. Thanks so much. So you can scan the QR code in the lower right corner of this slide, which links to our online FAQs, and it'll allow you to follow along as I reference them during this presentation. For all 7 eligible uses, including the provision of government services for funds claimed under revenue loss, recipients must obligate funds by December 31st, 2024. Recipients must expend these funds obligated for all eligible uses except surface transportation projects and Title I projects by December 31st, 2026. For surface transportation and Title I projects, recipients must expend SLFRF funds obligated by September 30th, 2026. So an obligation continues to mean an order placed for property and services and entry into contracts, subawards, and similar transactions that require payment. There are several pathways by which an obligation can be incurred. They are listed on this slide, and I'll read them off quickly here. An order placed for property or services, a contract, a subaward, similar transactions that require payment, which may include interagency agreements if they meet the conditions of FAQ 17.6. We'll share more about that in a minute. Payroll expenses for recipient employees if they meet the conditions in FAQ 17.7. Costs related to certain administrative and legal requirements. And Treasury has also released the new section 17 of the FAQs to provide additional clarification on the definition of obligation in order to help recipients ensure implementation of SLFRF funds. So on the next slide, let's talk about what doesn't constitute an obligation. You'll see a list here. An obligation is not an adopted budget or budget amendment, an appropriation of funds, an executive order, a resolution, a written or oral intent to enter into a contract, or a grant of legal authority to enter into a contract. Claiming funds under the revenue loss category, including for recipients utilizing the $10 million allowance, moving SLFRF funds as a general fund to a general fund as revenue loss, but not further establishing an obligation with those funds by December 31st. And please remember that any funds that are not obligated by that deadline will need to be returned to Treasury. So we touched on this a bit in the presentation, but we really want to make sure that you all are tracking that for all SLFRF funds, including those reported under revenue loss, must be obligated by the deadline, which means that projects that are entered in as expenditure category 6.1 must meet the same standard of obligation as any other eligible use category of SLFRF. So that means that those funds must be obligated via contract or interagency agreement, or one of the methods I just discussed. All SLFRF funds should be obligated by the deadline using the definition discussed, including revenue loss. So just reporting to Treasury, as we walked through, that you have claimed revenue loss funds does not mean they're automatically obligated. You can find more information on FAQ 17.5, and in the QR code, you can scan for a technical demonstration on the two-step process required to report your obligated revenue replacement funds. On the next slide, on FAQ 17.6, Treasury clarified that interagency agreements that meet certain conditions qualify as transactions requiring payment, and therefore are sufficient to meet the obligation requirement. So if you finalize an interagency agreement by the obligation deadline, you can treat that interagency agreement as an obligation of funds that a government agency will then expend in 2025 and 2026. Memoranda of agreement and memoranda of understanding can count as interagency agreements. However, we direct your attention to FAQ 17.6 because any agreement must meet the requirements summarized on this slide and in 17.6. Again, you can scan the QR code on the right for a handy one-pager on interagency agreements. And finally, I just want to thank you all for being here today, but especially to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Bloomberg Philanthropies for your important collaboration and support for recipients in this important area. Treasury remains focused on ensuring that recipients can leverage their SLFRF award funds to meet the unique needs of their communities and to power inclusive and equitable growth for decades to come. We look forward to joining you for future educational sessions, to sharing more resources and guidance on how to meet the obligation deadline. And we welcome impact stories from your communities of how you've benefited from these funds. Please contact us if you have any questions at slfrf@treasury.gov. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vera and Mira, for all this information. And I hope the cities will take advantage of the offer to reach out to Treasury. If you're not sure if you reported properly with your revenue loss funds, please check with them. Better to be safe than sorry. Also, I put it in the chat, but if there are cities who did projects and you say, I really want to do that too, I'd love to learn more, and you don't already have a contact in that city, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to put you in touch. We have a pretty extensive database, and through all of our partners, we should be able to find the right person for you. So next, we're going to turn it over to hear about a city that has been working hard to obligate its SLFRF funds. Candace Hill from the St. Clair County is going to talk to us about what they've been doing in St. Clair to put this money to work.
I'm excited to be here today. I feel less qualified than everyone else on this call, but that is okay because we are still in learning mode here in St. Clair County. My name is Candace Hill. I work with the St. Clair County Economic Development Council, and I'm their Grants and Leadership Director. And it's kind of a new deal for us because we have two communities that are over 20,000 people and the rest of them are much smaller. So we work with our county, which is under 100,000 at this point in time, and our local municipalities. So federal funding has been a very new experience for many of our communities. The St. Clair County Economic Development Council has a longstanding mission to support the economic growth and sustainability of our communities here in St. Clair County. And every 5 years, we develop a comprehensive strategic plan that guides our priorities and initiatives. So as part of this, the 5-year plan that actually began in 2024, we introduced a new grant resource center to help our municipalities access, manage, and make the most of grant funding. And this center was established in response to an overwhelming demand for support for the many municipalities that had yet to receive federal funds before now. And our commitment is to ensure that federal funds translate into tangible improvements for St. Clair County. And this commitment led us to Matt Hansen's team, and I think you'll hear from Matt in just a little bit, at Witt O'Brien's, and our local grants guru, Sabrina Miner-Gregg. She's been wonderful, and they all have met us where we are. And they've been very patient with our communities, and I really can't thank them enough for that. I'm going to move my notes down a little bit. With the American Rescue Plan Act and its SLFRF, that is a hard acronym to say, there was an urgent need for local guidance in our communities. And ARPA funds are not only significant in size, but they also come with detailed compliance requirements that were new territory for many municipalities. And our Grant Resource Center has been able to help to partner our municipalities in learning to manage these federal funds effectively. We've provided the needed tools and technical support to help cities across St. Clair County understand what's required and to maximize the benefits of this funding. When we're guiding our communities, we do our best to help them understand the differences between things like the state bid law in Alabama and the difference between it and the guidelines for procurement for federal awards. For example, our current state bid law in Alabama does not always require procurement for professional services. And as you know, the federal guidelines guiding ARPA do require that recipients bid out professional services. So simple things like that can create great issues. Alongside ARPA, we're also working to tap into resources available under the bipartisan infrastructure law. The BIL represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and we really have a lot of large-scale projects as part of our strategic plan and initiatives that can improve regional transportation, public facilities, and more. So we saw this as an opportunity to utilize the BIL to secure federal funding that could bring these projects to life in a way that was sustainable and impactful for St. Clair County and our residents. There are projects throughout our county that have stalled due to lack of funding, and many times the projects that are most needed get funded in local budgets, while those large infrastructure projects that with high price tags are pushed to the wayside. So BIL funds are helping our communities to see value in long-term vision, and we're looking to fund projects that could significantly change the way traffic moves on roads and bridges, the capacity of water and sewer infrastructure for future development, and the broadband connectivity in our rural areas. So we knew that success here in our county in Alabama would depend on tailored support, because we recognize that each of our communities, each of our cities and towns are different. They all have unique needs. They all have unique personalities. And we conducted comprehensive grant needs assessments, and we also did compliance assessments for each community. We looked at those evaluations. We gained insight into each municipality's strengths, and we also saw where our gaps in compliance were, which allowed us to create a custom approach to support. So we've been able to provide in-depth policy guidance, technical assistance, and compliance support for our municipalities. And this hands-on guidance has empowered each of them to feel more confident about securing and managing federal funds. So looking ahead, we're positioning our municipalities to compete successfully for future funds. And the groundwork we're laying now is about more than just meeting the needs that we have today with ARPA. And by implementing strong compliance measures and building technical expertise, we're ensuring that our cities are in a better position for future grant opportunities. And the experience they're gaining today will undoubtedly improve their chances to have future funding and to receive additional grant awards. For some of our smaller municipalities, those that had allocations under $10 million, managing compliance requirements with limited staff and resources has really been a challenge. And to ease this burden, we've advised many of these towns to allocate funds toward payroll. This straightforward approach minimized administrative complexity and allowed them to comply with ARPA regulations while focusing on their immediate needs. So this streamlined process has been a win-win, allowing them to remain compliant with the ARPA regulations, and then also to focus their efforts on projects that can impact their communities directly. So it's been a process for us that we've had to change some things around in some instances. There were errors that had been made. There were things that needed to be written to file to explain how and why we did things. But WIT has been great. They've been a great partner. And I feel like through the whole process, we've all learned a whole lot about federal funding and grant awards. One area that's been particularly challenging for us is procurement. So navigating procurement requirements for federal funds, it can be complex, but especially for communities that do not have dedicated staff. So we work with our county and 10 municipalities, and very few of them have someone on staff with experience managing grants and federal awards. And to address this, we're coming up with a consolidated approach that provides procurement guidance tailored to federal standards. But with our support, municipalities have strengthened their understanding of procurement requirements, which means they're not only meeting compliance today, but they're also capable of managing future federal funding independently. We kind of take the teach them to fish approach, and that we guide them through the circumstances they're in, they learn, and then they have our number if they need to phone a friend. So all of this work is helping our municipalities to build familiarity and comfort with federal processes. And by leveraging ARPA funds, we're giving them a chance to gain hands-on experience with federal funding. This experience is helpful as they look to pursue other opportunities, including those that are available under BIL. And with this foundation, they'll be better equipped to manage these opportunities with confidence. And confidence in the accuracy of the information that they're providing really is key, because we know our people and they want to do a really good job. They want their reporting to be accurate. They want to follow guidance provided. The auditors want for their reports to be accurate also. So the decisions and guidance surrounding ARPA, whether non-emergency or emergency, has been different to the norm. And there have been moments when we needed to explain what we did and why we did it. But WIT O'Brien's has given our communities the confidence to raise their hands and ask questions. And that's one thing that having those resources available in our community has been just really helpful to us. So in closing, I'd like to emphasize that our goal is to set our communities up for long-term success. And by developing a grant resource center, leveraging federal funds for large-scale projects, and providing tailored municipal support, we're working to create a sustainable impact across St. Clair County. And I'm excited about the work that we're doing. I'm excited about the projects that are getting a leg up just because these funding opportunities have been there. And I appreciate everyone having us. Thank you to Bloomberg Philanthropies and the U.S. Council of Mayors for putting together these types of seminars. I think that it's very, very helpful to us on the ground.
Candace, thank you so much. It was so great to hear about the work that you're doing and just really how it's also leading to building blocks across your city for being able to absorb other federal funding streams. And I just put in the chat for folks, we're going to be, we've been hearing, I won a BIL grant, and great, now I have to implement it and I don't know what to do. So we're doing a boot camp that's starting in January. We'll be pulling on Widow O'Brien and the Government Performance Lab and a bunch of different experts who can help you navigate, you know, how do you set yourself up to implement a federal grant? What are the different steps and requirements? You know, NEPA and Build America, Buy America, and all those things are just, you know, fun topics for all cities, but they're going to help hold your hands. And so please do register if you have any questions, reach out, because we want to make sure that beyond getting the press release that says that you're going to get money, you're actually able to receive it and put it to work. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to our good friend, Matt Hansen at Widow O'Brien, who has been helping us since before the American Rescue Plan was a thing, when it was us all figuring out how to use FEMA money and then CARES Act money and finally SLFRF. And so Matt has been hearing the issues that cities are having, and I think has some great strategies to share. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So please do keep questions coming in the chat. With that, I think I'll pass it over to you, Matt.
Sure, appreciate that, Jamie, and appreciate Candace's comments. You know, before COVID, there were regional planning commissions, councils of governments, economic development districts, economic development corporations doing a lot of good work, and they continue to do a lot of good work. So, you know, building capacity for the future and trying to leverage other federal financial assistance is always a good strategy as we get into these waning days to obligate the ARPA funding. So next slide. So I am generally a optimistic person who thinks we can move mountains in a limited amount of time. So I will continue to have maximum time remaining on this slide, but we're getting close. You know, you still have time, 12/31/24, and you can still be relatively strategic with the money, but it is getting tight, especially if you need counsel or other approvals. So for most of us, we're probably looking at interagency agreement approaches to obligations now, but folks, you know, don't give up. We still have, you know, time to get all the money fully obligated and committed before the deadline. One such strategy, leverage existing programs and initiatives. You know, your municipality likely has programs already in place that could benefit from additional funding. You know, either applications that could not be funded because of a lack of resources or partially funded. You know, please go back and take a look at those as quick and strategic places to obligate funding now. If you're holding out for the perfect plan A, now really is the time to be investing in plan B, plan C, et cetera. We know some jurisdictions that they were looking to establish, you know, homeless shelters and things, and they've been running into a buzzsaw with planning and zoning and things, and now really is the time to pivot and look at, you know, other, you know, housing assistance type programs just to make sure the money gets obligated now. Again, mine existing applications, data, look to see not only who could use additional funding, but who has been successful. You know, right now you're probably hearing from some subrecipients and other projects where they're starting to have doubts whether they're going to be able to pull off their projects or not. Look at the programs that have been successful and invest in those departments or those organizations to make sure you fully utilize the money. Treasury, again, just, you know, it's been a lot for them, and I give them all the credit in the world. They've really provided us with incredible administrative and programmatic flexibility. So please take advantage of it. You know, still, if you can, you know, get contracts issued, subawards entered into, beneficiary agreements by 12/31/24, that's great. But they've also made, you know, the interagency agreement tool, the estimation tool, and other flexibilities available to us. So there's really no excuses for us to be leaving money on the table. Look for fiscal agents and safe harbors. We want to invest in, small community-based organizations across our jurisdictions. Some of them might not be ready or might not have capacity. So look at, larger non-government organizations, chambers of commerce, or, the COGS and regional planning commissions that I just mentioned as places to obligate the funding now, so that ultimately over the next 2 years, you can serve, every corner of your community and reach those harder to reach organizations. And then finally, we still want you to be strategic, but also realistic. There are tons of opportunities, everybody's trying to be innovative. But really now is to have a realistic conversation about what can be accomplished, what can be pulled off, and what is sustainable into the future. Don't arbitrarily or inadvertently create funding cliffs that do more damage than good. And always look, if there's something, especially under revenue loss that you can invest in your own organization to create, general fund flexibility or some other financial resources to move forward. That's also always a great strategy. Next slide. So just some key reminders, and Treasury, thank you for the reminders about, how to do the reporting and some other things. But first and foremost, follow the guidance. There is a lot of noise and various interpretations out there right now. Refer to the resources provided by Treasury. An example, the one pager on interagency agreements is really informative and helpful. Let you know, what has to be included in that IIA document to meet their standard. People are throwing around templates, and I've used this, in the past. Treasury has put it there in black and white, so really take advantage of that. Understand the difference between reporting obligations and documenting obligations. Make sure you understand the reporting requirements for obligations, but you have to have the documentation as well. We're not uploading documents into the portal, so they need to be there in your files. Make sure you have them properly organized, saved off, that other people know, where that information is available. And this includes obligation documentation for revenue loss and provision of government services as well. Not only, do you claim revenue loss, you have to report the obligation in Treasury, in the portal, as Treasury just laid out, but then you also have to have the documentation in your file for when and if you go through a single audit or you get monitored, etc. Revenue loss, provision of government services. I think Treasury covered that well. They mentioned it's one of their biggest concerns with, smaller jurisdictions. It's one of my biggest concerns with smaller jurisdictions. Just the, we claimed revenue loss, we put it in our general fund, we're good to go. And no, that's not. There's another step, not only at the reporting side, but also on the obligation side. Make sure that you are reporting it under either expenditure category 6.1 or 6.2, that you created a project there and that you're also reporting an obligation and expenditure. Really important. Don't want to see anybody get tripped up by that issue. And this goes for, some folks that, might have done this in year one and thought they were done and they haven't come back since. Now is the time, go in, check, see how you've been reporting. If you get a message from Treasury, take it seriously, get it corrected, etc. Partnerships are key, both internal and external. Obviously look to where good work is being done programmatically, but also look to where good work is being done from a compliance perspective. Those are who you really want to be partnering with right now. And as I mentioned earlier, look to see who's actually executing on programs and projects. Look to see, not who sold you the best, the best idea, but now that we're a couple years into this, who's actually delivering on results. And as you're looking to obligate or re-obligate funds, those are the internal or external partners you really want to be investing in. don't overthink the interagency agreement approach. It's amazing how many questions we've gotten about, we're a city town, we can't contract with ourselves, or we're small, we don't have, multiple departments, who would the agreement be with? People are really trying to overcomplicate the interagency agreement, which is a tool for obligation purposes. It's not the equivalent of a contract or a vendor contract. It doesn't have the same legal authority that a procurement is. But again, Treasury's really done a good job of putting that one pager out on what an interagency agreement has to have in it to be compliant. And use that tool, use that resource. Don't overthink the overall process. And then lastly, plan for the future, and plan for the future. I'm referring to the next 2 years. Make sure you have what you need to do compliance, monitoring, audit prep, closeout, reporting, responding to single audit findings, responding to monitoring findings. Make sure you have those financial resources, and that you're either using the estimation approach or an interagency agreement approach to make sure you have access to those financial resources. And Treasury has certainly given us all the ability with admin funding, indirect cost recovery, et cetera, to make sure we have those financial resources. But make sure you're planning now, because you don't know what you're going to need a year from now or 2 years from now. So with that, I will open it up to any questions, Jamie, that might have come in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. We do have a number of questions. Some of them may have been submitted for Treasury. And so if we get to anything that feels better to refer to Treasury, we can send those in and get those cities' responses. So the first one that we got was from Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a two-parter. One is, do we need to have a contract with funding that has already been spent? We paid our parking department at the beginning of the grant period and did not use a contract or interdepartment agreement. That's the first one.
So first of all, Lincoln, Nebraska, I need the University of Nebraska to win one more game so they can be bowl eligible. They're killing me. But other than that, no, the expenditure with the city parking department, that transaction served as both the obligation and expenditure at that one time. So whether it's in your general ledger or in your accounting system, that's all taken care of. It would only be for if you were to do a future transaction with your parking department beyond 12/31/24, that you'd want to have an interagency agreement or something now to demonstrate the obligation. But if the expense has already happened, you're good to go.
Great. And the second one is something that's probably a shared question, is if a program is being funded with both, we'll call regular ARPA money and revenue replacement funding, do those need to be reported separately?
If it's all ARPA, but it's expenditure, regular expenditure category, and then revenue replacement, it does. It should be the portions of funding should be reported under the appropriate section. So you would have, let's say, $1 million in revenue loss that would get reported under 6.1, and $1 million of negative economic impact or something, it would be reported under that other expenditure category. It gets a little messy from a project perspective, but yeah, that's the appropriate way to do it. And for those that are annual reporters or have to do the annual report as well, that's really where you can detail the project and how the funding was braided together to accomplish a programmatic goal.
Great. And I'll just maybe harken back to some of the pointers that we got from Mira, which is that there's more detail required for those other categories. And so just making sure everyone pays attention to that. The next question was from Miami, Arizona. By the way, I learn about new cities all the time, so thank you, Miami. Can we obligate the funds for future salary on first responders like police?
Yes, absolutely. So it's, assuming it's your local police department and you're not, contracting with the county or somebody else for law enforcement services, it would be an interagency agreement between, the city manager and the police department, or whatever the case might be, is how you would obligate for public safety salaries beyond 12/31/24. If it's with a different unit of government, so if a city receives law enforcement services from the county, then it would be, an intergovernmental service agreement or some sort of documentation between the city and county.
And one of the communities in Arkansas asked us, do subrecipients have to have the funds spent by December 31st, 2026?
Yes. Yeah. So the expenditure period is the expenditure period. And quite honestly, if you have subrecipients, you should back those agreements up. I would say 90 days. So not have them go beyond September 30th, 2026, so that you as the direct recipient have time to, fully liquidate, do any closeout activity, report, and have everything wrapped up by 12/31/26.
I'm going to take moderator's privilege on this next one, which is we're working diligently to obligate our funds by December 31st. However, if we miss the mark, how do we return any unspent funds to Treasury? I'm going to ask a different question, which is, how can we not have that happen? And should we put them in touch with you to figure out how to get those last dollars spent?
Yeah, having been a federal official for 14 years, most federal agencies don't want the funding back. They made the funding available for a programmatic purpose, and they want their recipients to use it. So I would think Treasury would strongly encourage you to, figure out a way to obligate that to respond to, the COVID-19 pandemic. With the interagency agreement tool, even if it was just entering into a partnership with your local council of governments or regional planning commission or the large non-government organization in your community, there are a multitude of ways of using it. Now, if there's political disagreement and your city council can't come to a decision, and I don't think any of us can really help you with that. And we've heard of some of that, but if it's a lack of ideas or lack of mechanisms, certainly please reach out to any of us and we can help walk you through that.
And so to the anonymous caller who submitted that, we'll be getting in touch with you to help you make sure you spend all your money. The next question is from Columbia, South Carolina. How do you change or amend programs after the December 31st obligation date?
From a reporting perspective, you would go into the portal, whether you're a quarterly reporter or an annual reporter, and make the changes, the updates. From a non-reporting perspective, it's updating an IA, updating a subrecipient agreement, amending a contract, and Treasury in the FAQs has laid out the various reasons and provisions for when you can, take money away from an obligation, when you can add money to an obligation. So it's pretty straightforward. But from a reporting perspective, it would be the next time you go into the portal to submit your next report that you can make those corrections.
Great. Maybe you just answered this, but we had a question from Fresno. Is the only option for obligating overhead an interagency agreement after the December 31st, 24 deadline?
No, overhead related to the administration of the grant, you can obligate using the estimation process that Treasury has laid out. So you have, you kind of have, 4 different approaches. If you subaward to a regional planning commissioner, somebody who's providing, the grant administration services for you, that would be a way of obligating for overhead. If you contract with a vendor, that would be a way. An interagency agreement certainly would do it, but Treasury has provided the cost estimation approach as well to demonstrate your obligation for grant overhead purposes.
Awesome. A question from Alliance, Ohio. If a city provides grants to nonprofits in November, for example, does the separate recipient have to spend by the end of 2024? One intended use is to grant to Habitat for Humanity, who would then administer a revolving loan fund for critical repairs infinitely. And I think that was maybe Kevin in the chat had just raised that back up. So how do revolving loan funds work?
So revolving loan funds are a little different in that they have some various stipulations about the maturity and the principal beyond 2026. So would need to know a little bit more about how the program is structured to give you a direct answer. Treasury does have a series of FAQs about maturity of revolving loan funds and how and when the money can be used. The first answer, if a subaward is made in November of this year, does the subrecipient have to expend or enter into anything by 12/31/24? And the answer is no. They have the next 2 years to enter into regular transactions, and then depending on how the revolving loan is structured, even beyond that. But a question I would need a little bit more detail to give a complete answer to.
Great. And so, Kevin, we're going to be posting a link in the chat to request office hours if you want to get a little bit more time to go deeper on the answer there. The next question is, I think this is probably a shared reporting question. Fremont, Nebraska asks, the next report is due April 30th, 2025 for our community. Obligations, though, as we all know, are due 12/31/24. We do not need to submit another report besides the annual report to meet the obligation deadline, correct?
So for those smaller communities that report annually, correct. Your next report will be through 3/31/25, reported 4/30/25. There is no such thing as an interim report for annual reporters for obligation purposes. That being said, however, on 12/31/24, you want to make sure that your documents are in order, that you have all of those contracts, subawards, personnel expenses, interagency agreements to prove and demonstrate that the obligations happen by 12/31/24, even though you're not going to be reporting it for another quarter.
So maybe just to dig into that a hair deeper, just because we did hear from our partners at the Treasury Department that there's this recurring reporting error happening. And it sounds like it's in a lot of these communities that don't have, that are on the annual reporting deadline. What should they practically be doing to make sure that they're not in that category of making this mistake?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's a good practice to go in after you've submitted your report and download your own copy and take a look at it, not just, as you're in the portal, putting in the data and everything validates and you're great, and I hit submit and then I walk away, but to actually go back in and print off a copy and look and see if there are, boxes that are blank or things, that don't look quite right. And now, with the additional guidance from Treasury, go to those specific fields like the ones under revenue loss 6.1 and make sure that there's a complete data set there. And know that so that when, the state recovery office or Treasury or somebody else reaches out, you know what the problem is and you're able to respond to them. Yes, I realize what I did, yeah, I'll get it fixed. But then also just to do a crosswalk between your obligation documentation and what your reporting obligation says to make sure they're in sync. I know that there are folks that probably went in one time and said it's 100% revenue loss. 6.1, $5 million, fully obligated, fully expended. I'm good. I never want to deal with reporting again. But if you actually cracked open their files, there would not be corresponding documentation that shows 5 million obligated, 5 million expended. And that's really the critical piece, is to make sure that documentation is in the files, and then to be prepared to make those corrections the next time you report, whether that be quarterly or annually.
Great. We have a few more questions. We're going to keep getting to them. We're also going to pull up a poll to hear from you all. And I'm going to put a link in the chat while Matt is talking, where you can request some one-on-one time. Please do take advantage of it. If there's anything that you feel unsure about leading into this December 31st deadline, we want to give you the confidence that you are you're all set and you've done everything you need to do, and every single dollar is going to stay in your community. So we'll pull up the poll and you guys can fill that out, and I'll share the link in the chat. The next question, and thank you for putting it in again, I think it's from DeZetta, Texas, is the city is drilling a new water well utilizing SLFRF funds along with the Texas Water Development Board funds. Does it have to have a completed procurement, awarded the project, and have the contract signed in order to avoid losing SLFRF funds?
So short answer is no. You can use an interagency agreement right now to obligate the funding for this project. If you're not going to use the interagency agreement, the big question is the state and local fiscal recovery going to be used as some sort of match to the other funding? If it is used for a form of match, whether that be a federally mandated match or a state mandated match, and you're braiding the money together, then the program that has the most restricted covenants applies to the whole package of money. And that's not a Treasury issue. That's an issue of, the other source of funding that requires it. I think you've probably heard me say this before, but I'm a big proponent of cooperative purchasing programs, especially for last minute procurement activity. Many cooperative purchasing programs have gone through a competitive process to begin with, and you can purchase off of that. It looks like Cindy just put a clarification, not as a match. So no, interagency agreement, obligate the funds, and you're good to go as far as whenever the project as a whole goes out for procurement. But I would definitely encourage you to take a look at cooperative purchasing whenever possible, as sort of an easy approach to federal compliance for procurement and not having to put your own jurisdiction through a full-blown RFP process.
Great. So we have a fairly technical question, so I'm going to do my best with it. If a city receives more than $35 million in FY 2024, are they required to submit an indirect cost rate proposal per Appendix 7 to 2 CFR 200 D.1.B? If yes, is that city eligible to utilize the de minimis rate of up to 15%? And who is the point of contact?
So I'll start with the end of it. The increased de minimis rate of 15% only applies to federal grant awards made after October 1st, 24. So the 15% doesn't apply to the ARPA State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund at all. So we're talking about 10%, which is the old de minimis rate. And then, there's so many layers to that. Did the jurisdiction have a previously negotiated NICRA? Are we talking to the direct recipient or a sub-recipient, pass-through recipient? So I don't think we can fully unpack that whole thing, other than just to clarify that for ARPA, through the end of ARPA, through 26, we're only ever talking about a 10% de minimis rate.
Great. If anyone, we have a question from Kathleen Lambert. If the division of our city does not have signing authority, only the mayor does, would that negate an interagency agreement?
It would not. again, this gets back to that overcomplicating the interagency agreement. This isn't the same as a contract that the city would enter into. You know, a couple things you could do. The mayor could sign in both places, you know, signing on behalf of the department, or the mayor could delegate, you know, signing, you know, authority to another city employee to sign on behalf of it. But is the interagency agreement is used for obligation purposes and is not the equivalent of a legal contract.
If anyone has any remaining questions, feel free to raise your hand, come off mute. And if not, just want to say a huge thank you to Matt. We don't give him the questions in advance, and as you can tell, they're often quite technical. So thank you, Matt, for being a real source of both reassurance and information at this critical time. Just want to also say thank you so much to Vero Soto, to Mira Patel, to James Bond, to the entire team at Treasury, to Jackie Benton for just incredible partnership. If you all feel like you need another one of these, if it would be helpful, please do let us know. We're happy to continue providing support up through the obligation deadline. We're also not going anywhere. And so once we pass the obligation week deadline, we still have the spending deadline and reporting to do. So we'll make sure that we continue helping you navigate this because we know how important these funds are. And with that, we will close it out. Thank you all so much.